In 1353 BC, the sun rose over Thebes just as it had for thousands of years, but this morning was different. An army arrived at the gates of the city, but these weren't soldiers, they were stonemasons, hundreds of them, carrying chisels, hammers, and scaffolding. They marched through the streets toward the great temples, monuments that had stood for generations, and they began a task that had never been attempted in the history of Egypt. They began erasing a pharaoh from existence. Every cartouche that bore one specific name was chiseled out of the stone. Every statue that showed one specific face was smashed to pieces. Every inscription that mentioned one specific pharaoh was ground to dust. The order had come from the new regime, and it was absolute. Erase every trace of this king, remove him from history, make it as if he had never existed. His name was Akhenaten, and for the next 3,300 years, he would remain the most powerful ghost in the history of Egypt. That is, until 1907, when archaeologists opened a sealed tomb in the Valley of the Kings and found something that shouldn't have been there. Inside was a body, but not just any body. This coffin had been desecrated. The royal symbols had been burned off. The face had been destroyed. The name had been hacked out. But the body was still there, waiting in the darkness for over 3 millennia. This is the story of Akhenaten. And before you click away thinking you know this story, I need to tell you something. You don't. Everyone thinks they know about the heretic pharaoh, the man who tried to replace Egypt's gods with one sun disk, the religious fanatic who nearly destroyed the empire. But that's not why he was erased. The real reason is buried in what they found in that tomb, and it connects to a mystery that involves a boy king you definitely know, a curse that killed 9 people, a secret chamber that was sealed with a warning, and a conspiracy that is still active today. But first, you need to understand what made this man so dangerous that Egypt didn't just kill him, they tried to uninvent him. In year 5 of his reign, he stood before the priests of Amun, the most powerful religious order in Egypt, men who had controlled the empire's wealth and spiritual authority for over 500 years, and he made an announcement that would change everything. "The old gods are false," he declared. "There is only one true god, the Aten, the sun disk." The priests were stunned. This wasn't a reform, this was a revolution. But Akhenaten wasn't finished. "I'm abandoning Thebes. This city is corrupted by false worship. The Aten has commanded me to build a new capital in the desert on virgin ground that has never been touched by the old gods." The priests thought he was bluffing. They had seen pharaohs make grand declarations before, only to be reined in by political reality. But Akhenaten wasn't bluffing. Within months, he had marshaled 50,000 people, workers, artisans, administrators, entire families, and marched them into the barren desert 200 miles north of Thebes. There, in a place where nothing had ever stood before, he built a city from absolute nothing. He called it Akhenaten, which means the horizon of the Aten. He carved a message into the stone cliffs that surrounded the site, a message that can still be read today. "I was not satisfied with any other place. The Aten commanded me to build here, and here I shall stay forever." And he meant it. For the next 12 years, Akhenaten never left that city. He never returned to Thebes. He was so committed to his vision, so absorbed in his new religion that he abandoned the empire his ancestors had spent 500 years building. And while Akhenaten was in his desert paradise, praying to the sun and writing hymns to the Aten, the world around him was collapsing. The Hittite Empire, Egypt's great rival to the north, was systematically swallowing Egypt's territories. The Amarna letters, actual diplomatic tablets that archaeologists found at the site of Akhenaten's city, tell the real story of what was happening beyond his isolated bubble. Foreign kings who were supposed to be Egypt's vassals wrote desperate letters begging for help. "Where is Egypt's gold? Where are Egypt's armies? Our cities are burning. Please send help." Akhenaten either ignored these pleas or never even read them. One letter from a vassal king in Canaan is particularly haunting. "If no troops come this year, then all the king's lands are lost." No troops came. The empire that had taken 500 years to build was collapsing in just 17 years. And that should have been why they erased him, the pharaoh who was so obsessed with his religious revolution that he let the empire collapse while he was praying to the sun. But that's not why they erased him at all. Akhenaten had 6 daughters but no sons, and this created a serious problem for the succession. Egyptian pharaohs needed male heirs to continue the divine bloodline. So Akhenaten did something that was technically common in Egyptian royal families, but rarely taken to such an extreme. He married 2 of his own daughters. One of those daughters was named Akhenaten, and she would become the most powerful and most tragic woman in Egyptian history. When Akhenaten died mysteriously in year 17 of his reign, the succession descended into chaos. His co-regent, who was possibly his brother Smenkhare, or possibly even Nefertiti disguised as a male pharaoh, ruled for about 2 or 3 years and then vanished from the historical record completely. Then, suddenly, a 9-year-old boy was made pharaoh. His name was Tutankhamun, which means living image of the Aten. To legitimize his claim to the throne, he was married to Akhenaten, his half-sister and possibly even his aunt. She was perhaps 13 years old. Within a year, the priests of the old religion forced the boy king to change his name. Tutankhaten became Tutankhamun, living image of Amun. The old gods were back. Akhenaten's revolution was officially over, but the damage to the royal bloodline had only just begun. In 1907, archaeologists discovered a tomb in the Valley of the Kings, designated KV55. Then, in 2010, scientists ran DNA tests on the mummy, and the results were deeply disturbing. The body was male. It was definitely from the royal family. It was almost certainly either Akhenaten or his brother Smenkhare. But the DNA revealed something much darker than just the identity of one pharaoh. It showed that generations of brother-sister marriages, father-daughter marriages, and uncle-niece marriages had completely destroyed the genetics of this royal bloodline. Tutankhamun, who was tested separately, turned out to be the son of this mummy in KV55. His DNA showed catastrophic genetic damage. He had a club foot, he had a cleft palate, he had malaria, he had scoliosis. He couldn't walk with a cane, and he died at just 19 years old. 2 mummified fetuses were found buried in Tutankhamun's tomb, his children with Akhenaten. Both were stillborn, both were girls, both showed genetic abnormalities. The royal line was literally dying from within, poisoned by centuries of keeping power in the family at any cost. And the famous curse of the pharaohs, it didn't start with Tutankhamun. It started here with the erased king, with Akhenaten. So why was Akhenaten really erased from history? It wasn't because he worshipped the Aten instead of Amun. It wasn't because he moved the capital. It wasn't even because he let the empire collapse while he was praying to the sun. The real reason was far more dangerous to the foundations of Egyptian civilization. Akhenaten proved something that had been unthinkable for 2,000 years. Pharaohs could be replaced. For 2 millennia, Egyptian kingship had been built on one unshakable foundation. The pharaoh wasn't just a political leader or a military commander. He was a living god, divine, untouchable, eternal. But Akhenaten's reign shattered that illusion completely. The Amarna letters include one piece of correspondence that changes our entire understanding of what happened. It's a letter from Nefertiti herself, Akhenaten's queen and the woman who had been depicted in art as almost his equal, as a co-ruler. In this letter, she stops referring to Akhenaten as my husband and starts calling him that man, a phrase loaded with contempt and rejection. If the queen herself could turn against the pharaoh, what did that mean for everyone else? What did it mean for the military commanders, the provincial governors, the common people? General Horemheb, who would eventually seize the throne and become pharaoh himself, was watching all of this unfold. He saw the empire collapsing. He saw the treasury being emptied. He saw foreign enemies advancing. He saw the people starving. And he saw the pharaoh doing absolutely nothing about it because he was too busy praying to a sun disk. Horemheb realized something revolutionary, something that threatened the very foundation of Egyptian civilization. If one god-king could fail, then any god-king could fail. If Akhenaten could be rejected, removed, erased, then the entire concept of divine kingship was a lie. And that realization was more dangerous than any foreign invasion, more threatening than any religious change. This was an existential crisis for everything Egypt had believed for 2,000 years. So they didn't just erase Akhenaten, the man, they erased the idea he represented. They erased the proof that pharaohs were mortal, fallible, and replaceable, and they were incredibly thorough about it. They didn't just chisel out his name, they created what might be the first propaganda campaign in human history. Official documents were rewritten to skip directly from Amenhotep III, Akhenaten's father, to Tutankhamun,
as if Akhenaten's entire 17-year reign had simply never happened. Temple inscriptions that listed all the kings of Egypt left a conspicuous blank where Akhenaten's name should have been.
In the few texts where they had to reference him, they never used his name. They called him the criminal of Akhenaten, the enemy, the rebel, but never by his actual name, never acknowledging him as a legitimate pharaoh. And it worked. For 3,000 years, we believed exactly what they wanted us to believe, that Akhenaten was just a mad religious fanatic who temporarily destroyed Egypt before the natural order was restored. But that was the lie, and we fell for it completely. But I promised you the real secret, the piece of this puzzle that changes everything we think we know about this period. And here it is. The coffin that was found in KV 55, the one that had been so violently desecrated, the one with the name hacked out and the face destroyed, that coffin wasn't originally made for Akhenaten. It was made for a woman. Specifically, it was made for Nefertiti. The evidence is subtle but undeniable. In the hieroglyphs that weren't completely erased, you can still see feminine grammatical endings. The titles that remain reference great royal wife, not king. This coffin was created for Nefertiti to be buried not as a queen, but as a pharaoh, as a female king. And here's what that means. Nefertiti didn't just disappear when Akhenaten died, she became pharaoh herself. She ruled Egypt for at least 2 years, possibly 3. The evidence is fragmentary because, like Akhenaten, they tried to erase her completely. But archaeological finds from the city of Akhenaten show inscriptions for a pharaoh named Neferuaten, a name that includes Nefer twice, clearly echoing Nefertiti. And this pharaoh continued to make offerings to the Aten. She continued Akhenaten's religious revolution even after his death. Then, abruptly, this pharaoh vanishes from all records, and a new name appears in the king list, Smenkhare. But here's where it gets even more complicated. Smenkhare might have been a different person entirely, or Smenkhare might have been Nefertiti ruling under a male name because Egypt wasn't ready for a female pharaoh. Or Smenkhare might have been Akhenaten's brother who had been waiting in the wings and finally took power. We simply don't know because they erased it all. And then Smenkhare, whoever that person really was, also vanishes from history, and suddenly a 9-year-old boy is placed on the throne. Tutankhamun. Why would you make a child pharaoh during such a chaotic time? The answer is simple, because children can be controlled. The real power during Tutankhamun's reign wasn't in the hands of the boy king. It was held by the people behind the throne. General Horemheb, the priests of Amun who wanted their power back, and who was Tutankhamun's advisor and possibly his grandfather. These were the people actually running Egypt. They only needed a puppet, a figurehead who could restore the old gods and legitimize their regime. And when that puppet died at the age of 19, whether from disease or possibly even murder, they just found another one. Ruled as pharaoh for 4 years. Then Horemheb cedes power and ruled for 27 years. And Horemheb did something truly unprecedented in Egyptian history. He backdated his own reign to begin immediately after Amenhotep III, Akhenaten's father. He literally erased the entire Amarna period from the official chronology. Akhenaten, Nefertiti, Smenkhare, Tutankhamun, 17 years of history, 5 pharaohs, all of them gone as if they had never existed. And the 18th dynasty, which had been the most powerful dynasty in Egyptian history, ended in absolute chaos, conspiracy, and blood. Now here's where this story stops being ancient history and becomes something else entirely. This is where it becomes a warning about how far authorities will go to control a narrative, even 3,300 years later. In 2010, when the DNA results from KV-55 mummy were finally published, they raised far more questions than they answered. Yes, the body was male. Yes, it was from the royal family. Yes, it was related to Tutankhamun, but the exact identity, still unclear. Was it Akhenaten? Was it Smenkhare? The DNA couldn't definitively say. So in 2015, an international team of geneticists requested permission from the Egyptian government to run more advanced DNA tests using newer technology that could potentially identify the mummy once and for all. The Egyptian government said no. In 2020, another team requested permission. Again, no. In 2023, a team from Cairo University itself, Egyptian researchers, not foreigners who might have political motivations, requested permission to conduct the tests. And once again, the answer was no.
The official reason given by the Egyptian authorities was respect for the dead. They claimed that they couldn't continue disturbing royal remains. But here's the problem with that explanation. In 2014, Egyptian authorities allowed extensive DNA testing on Tutankhamun's mummy. In 2017, they approved CT scans and genetic analysis on Ramesses III. In 2021, they authorized invasive testing on the so-called Screaming Mummy, who is believed to be a prince who was executed for treason. They have allowed invasive scientific testing on dozens of royal mummies over the past 2 decades. So why not KV55? What is so different about this particular body? What could the DNA possibly reveal that is worth keeping secret in the 21st century? And it's not just about KV55. In 2015, a British Egyptologist named Nicholas Reeves published the results of radar scans he had conducted inside Tutankhamun's tomb. The scans showed clear voids behind the north and west walls of the burial chamber, voids that could be hidden chambers. Reeves theorized that these might actually be the burial chamber of Nefertiti herself, and that Tutankhamun's famous tomb was really just the outer chambers of a much larger tomb complex that had been sealed and forgotten. It was a revolutionary theory. The Egyptian government initially seemed interested and approved further scanning. But then, in 2018, they suddenly halted all the work. No explanation was given. No further investigation was allowed. The project was just shut down. And right now, as you're watching this video, ground-penetrating radar has detected multiple sealed chambers throughout the Valley of the Kings, chambers that have never been opened in modern times, chambers that the Egyptian government has mapped with their own equipment, chambers whose existence they acknowledge, but they absolutely refuse to excavate them. Why? What could possibly be in those chambers that is worth keeping sealed for another 3,000 years? The official answer is preservation concerns. They claim that opening the chambers might damage whatever's inside, but they've excavated countless other tombs. They've opened sealed chambers before, so what makes these different? Think about the pattern here. 3,300 years ago, Egyptian authorities erased Akhenaten to protect the idea of divine kingship, to protect the foundation of their entire civilization. Today, Egyptian authorities are blocking research into Akhenaten to protect what exactly? Tourism revenue from Tutankhamun's golden mask? National pride? Or is there something in that genetic data, something in those sealed chambers that fundamentally contradicts the official narrative of Egyptian history? Is there something that would prove the erasure was even more extensive than we thought? Something that would reveal secrets that those in power, even today, want to keep buried? The erasure of Akhenaten never really stopped. It just became bureaucratic. It just changed management. But here's the final irony of this entire story. Akhenaten wanted to live forever as the Aten, as the eternal sun disk, unchanging, immortal, divine. And in a strange way, he actually succeeded. Not as a god, he became a ghost so potent that 3,300 years after his death, we are still trying to speak his name, still arguing about his identity, still uncovering his secrets. Every single time you see Tutankhamun's golden mask in a museum or in a photograph, you are looking at the face of Akhenaten's son, the product of his bloodline. Every time you hear about the curse of the pharaohs, you are hearing the echoes of his erasure reverberating through history. Every time the Egyptian government blocks a DNA test or refuses to open a sealed chamber, you are watching the erasure continue in real time, just with different people giving the orders. The stonemasons who were ordered to chisel out his name failed completely, because in their attempt to delete him from history, they accidentally made him immortal. Akhenaten is more famous now, more discussed, more analyzed than he ever was during his actual lifetime. He is more powerful as a ghost than he ever was as a living pharaoh. And the secret that he represents, the dangerous truth that pharaohs can fall, that authority can be questioned, that official history is always written by the winners, that secret is perhaps even more dangerous today than it was 3,300 years ago. If you want to know what they found beneath Tutankhamun's tomb and why Egypt suddenly resealed it in 2015, then subscribe to this channel, because the erased history of Egypt isn't finished revealing itself, and neither am I.